Lovely to be here today and to have this opportunity to share the findings from this research that I was involved in a number of years back when I was studying at York University and under the direction of Professor Jennifer Heineman. So I will share my screen. All right. Does that look good?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to be, as I mentioned, sharing the findings from this project entitled Sustaining the Private Sponsorship of Resettled Refugees in Canada. This research set out to document what makes the private sponsorship of refugee program sustainable year in and year out. And it really emerged at a time where a lot of the research that was being conducted was focused on new sponsors, and in particular, when such focus fell on the Syrian refugee movement, if you recall, back in 2015, 2016. So much of what was happening in the academic and the scholarly landscape was really looking at that movement and the resettlement in support of it. Our work really turned the lens at that time to the more seasoned sponsors, with this goal of trying to better understand how such a demanding program, as many of you would know, a demanding program of volunteerism and community engagement has been sustained for so long. And especially given the intense commitment that's often required, and in particular upon people's arrival to Canada. So to carry this out, it was a qualitative study that we undertook from about 2016 to 2020, so maybe a bit dated in today's landscape. But we did canvass about 100, more than 100 participants across 5 of 10 Canadian provinces, including British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. And from these sites, we gathered insights from experienced sponsors, and that included former refugees themselves. So those were individuals that had come through the program and had been resettled to Canada, long-term sponsors. And so spanning, for the most part, the majority of participants had at least participated in sponsorship for about 10 years, if not longer, and some as long as 40 years. So quite a broad range of individuals that had participated in repeat sponsorship. We also interviewed key informants and other community leaders. And in most cases, respondents, as I said, had more than 10 years of experience and were asked questions about their experience and their motivation in becoming a refugee sponsor, as well as their views on what keeps sponsors doing sponsorship time in and time out. So that's what we focused our questions and our investigation on. And in exploring those responses, we found 2 really distinct motivations that emerged, and one that I'm putting under this camp of social justice commitment. And these are the sponsors that really expressed a commitment to, quote unquote, do the right thing. And so really felt like they were enacting a local social justice that was having this broader global impact. There was a second camp of sponsors that also came out of these responses. And those were that were also experienced for varying times, but were more driven out of this sense of obligation or an urgency to assist and to provide support to family members who remained at risk, who were left behind. And otherwise, it was individuals, again, for the most part, newcomers who were motivated by a commitment to ethno-national kin. So we can think of that as a broader group of people who have a shared background, fleeing the similar source of violence or enmity. So to really bring this to life or to illustrate it, I wanted just to share 2 quotes, one from each of those types of sponsors. And what you're seeing here is a quote from Kate, as she was one of the participants who had actually been involved in sponsorship for more than 40 years. So a lot of rich knowledge and experience in the landscape. And what she shared was, I think that people who have faith in humanity and those who are interested in human rights, we just see this as a justice issue. They're more apt to continue, and it doesn't matter whether the experiences have been all warm and fuzzy or difficult or all of these things. But for people who see it in those terms, it's not something that you just do once and go off and do something else. As we learn so much about resilience and human nature, we learn so much about our own culture and how we complain about things that are inconsequential. And when you see how resilient people are, and when you can see people together. So that's one illustration of that really, amongst many other responses, that really anchored in this notion of we feel compelled and committed to do this work driven by social justice. On the other camp, we've got this example here that came from a participant, Fikri, who had himself been a newcomer to Canada and contributed to the sponsorship of a man, among many other sponsorships that he also did, that he had never met, but really felt compelled to provide protection and peace. The man who he has supported had been jailed for engaging in political dissent related to human rights atrocities that were taking place at the time by the Ethiopian government, and was subjected to torture. So as Fikri described, they took out his toenails, they broke his ribs, and they can't have a baby. He can't have a baby. So that pain, I guess, that he had felt upon learning these details really is what galvanized him, in his own words, to him and other people to get together and undertake sponsorship of a person who we can refer to as an ethno-national kin, and as a way to bring them to safety and protection. So with these two examples, or these two camps of sponsors and the motivations that drive them, we have a social justice-based community practice that really constitutes this one category of motivation, and another that's really made up by the more urgent demands for resettlement among family members and ethno-national kin who remain at risk and oftentimes in very precarious situations. So the main argument that we advance is this idea that sponsorship can be best understood as a community practice. And what that means is that it's more of a routine action that's part of a commitment to the community as well as to others. And what we show in our findings is that sponsorship is seen as less of it's not like a task, it's not transactional, it's not this to-do list. Although to-do lists are an important tool, as we'll hear from other colleagues today, around training and ensuring that you're engaging in all the components that are required to be able to carry this program out successfully, whether that is to guide and train sponsors, and especially new groups who are just emerging to the landscape and are without experience. But it's more of a generalized commitment is what we put forward to this global human rights and social justice, and particularly for those displaced in conditions that are not of their own making. So the private sponsorship, based on our findings, what makes it sustainable is that it's more than just an international arrangement, but it's transnational in that sponsors and former refugees oftentimes in these repeat cases are maintaining these really intimate contacts with those who remain in conflict zones or sanctuary spaces of refugees, of refugee abroad. And that's in part what drives the motivation to continue sponsorship. And so sustainability is deeply rooted in this shared purpose. It's also rooted in these local connections, and then this local dedication that drives communities forward to do this work over time. And so in the absence of sponsors, like many of you who are on this call, those who commit substantial resources in terms of time and money and energy, the program in itself would collapse, leaving thousands of people precariously displaced without any possibility of resettlement. And as we all know, these possibilities are often too few for the many that are in need of them. So in terms of also, the sustainability piece is really good to understand how that happens and what some of the driving or the motivating factors that compel people to continue this work forward over time. there's also significant barriers that can exist to repeat sponsorship. And what we identified was a number of things in this research, beginning with probably the most obvious one, and that's the financial strain. As many of you will already know, sponsorship requires substantial fundraising and personal financial commitment, approximating, $28,000 to support a family of 4, and that's at a minimum, oftentimes over the resettlement period and beyond month 12, it can be much more a significant contribution than that. So the living in the settlement support after the families arrive in Canada. Many sponsors were found to struggle to maintain the same level of contribution for subsequent sponsorship. So you might be able to invest and do it the one time, but to then commit to this on a repeat period becomes really challenging financially. And that's also paired up with the rising cost. I mean, at that time, we were really focused on the rising cost of housing, and in particularly in the more urban areas where we conducted this field work, such as Vancouver, made it difficult to accommodate newcomers without, they didn't particularly have the family-linked housing support. And you can imagine how much more challenging that would be, 5 years forward in this current economy and landscape that would have only been heightened. We also had identified volunteer fatigue and emotional burnout. So the demands of sponsorship are obviously high, as I mentioned, in a financial way, but also on a personal level. And sponsors shared that they felt fatigued. And so, as one mentioned, I'm so burnt out, said Lois. And Lois is a sponsor actually still, who has been involved in sponsorship since 1983. And who had mentioned that she had taken a number of breaks throughout the process since she had started becoming a volunteer, just as a way to kind of recalibrate herself after feeling burnt out. But I think what really stands out even in this example is that despite these burdens of feeling fatigued and emotionally burnt out, the volunteers continued to sponsor. So similar, like Lois. And more than that, they also expanded the members of their communities by bringing additional people into their sponsorship groups, and a really dedicated focus to also recruiting newcomers to also participate in their circles of sponsorship. The continuous...
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Just watch your time.
How many?
Sorry.
Okay. It's okay. I've got a few more bullets and then I'll wrap it up. Yeah, just the point of that, what also contributes to the fatigue and the emotional burnout is the fact that it's, research has been conducted on this, that sponsorship often continues beyond month 12, so well into month 13th and onward. We also have the over-reliance as a burden or a barrier, over-reliance on volunteer labor, that the program's sustainability depends heavily on unpaid labor, the unpaid community work, and the limited institutional and government infrastructure to really ease that load on sponsors. Administrative burdens, I feel like enough can't be said about this, and there's some really interesting and compelling research that was just published drawing on Canadian data last year that focused on the complex paperwork and the bureaucratic delays and how that discourages repeat sponsorship. And we saw that even a spike of that more recently come up with the advent of the program integrity framework that is currently governing the SAW structure. As well as political and ethical tensions is another example of a barrier to repeat sponsorship. And that tension that exists really at that intersection of family-linked named case sponsorships versus the UNHCR referred cases that are based on the vulnerability criteria, and what that means in terms of who can get to participate in sponsorship and who gets that opportunity for resettlement. And the final example is the lack of institutional support. And we found this to be particularly true for sponsors who are working in maybe more isolated or smaller networks and who don't have as much of a strong national coordination or consistent training, and especially those that exist outside those large urban centers. So as a concluding message, we can see how sponsorship is hindered, by all of these themes of financial strain and volunteer burnout, bureaucratic complexities, ethical dilemmas on who to prioritize, and even institutional support. But in spite of all that, sponsors continue to do the work because they do feel that it's deeply meaningful and urgent. So sponsorship is rooted in this way in relationships and not transactions, and is ultimately sustained by this belief and commitment that communities can make a difference in displacement. And so this is how we put it forward in our research, that sponsorship is not just about bringing refugees to safety. It is a sustained act of community building that connects Canadians to a global struggles for justice. And I think for me, that's how I'm entering the conversation today. How do we carry the spirit forward and do that together, and really and do so in a way where the landscape has changed so significantly and feels particularly turbulent at this time. Thank you.
So welcome everyone. And thank you, Anne, for the introduction, and Biftu for the really interesting and helpful information in your presentation and your research. In my short presentation, we will explore the Refugee Sponsorship Training Program, or RSTP, and its role in preparing sponsors through pre-arrival training, and also will highlight the importance of the pre-arrival and settlement planning. So preparing for the arrival and the role of RSTP. Just a brief introduction about our team. So it's a program, it's a national program funded and mandated by IRCC to support sponsors of refugees. RSTP equips sponsors with the knowledge and tools they need to support refugees effectively. Pre-arrival training helps sponsors understand their responsibilities and the needs of newcomers, ensuring a smoother transition for everyone involved in the sponsorship. So the program provides training, resources, and guidance throughout the sponsorship journey, in person, online, by phone, and email. We support sponsoring groups from the early stages of figuring out the requirements for sponsorship until the very end of the sponsorship year. And trainers at RSTP comes with a strength that we come from various cultural backgrounds and speak native languages of the newcomers, the sponsored refugees. And each trainer has different expertise and strength. And some of us they come with a lived experience as refugees themselves, or I mean, former refugees themselves. So the pre-arrival training purpose is to equip sponsors with knowledge of refugee needs, to clarify roles and responsibilities, who is doing what and when and how, and to foster realistic expectations and cultural sensitivity as well. And also building sponsorship, to build sponsorship confidence, ensure smoother transitions, enhance refugee well-being from day one of their arrival in Canada. And also sponsors will learn to anticipate the challenges that will come on their way and prepare solutions for effective sponsorships. So the importance of settlement plan. So this slide and the following information will highlight the importance of having a solid settlement plan. A settlement plan, it's a roadmap that outlines how sponsors will support refugees in key areas like housing, healthcare, employment, budgeting, contingency plans. It ensures that nothing falls through the cracks and that refugees receive consistent, coordinated support from their sponsors and their community. A well-prepared plan also helps sponsors stay organized and accountable. So settlement planning is a foundation for success. And Biftu talked about, the checklist and the importance of the checklist. And, it is, although it is the sponsorship by itself, as Biftu mentioned, the functions as a community practice, but then settlement plan and checklist is also important to be in place. So what is a settlement plan? It's a comprehensive support framework, and it's a detailed roadmap for supporting refugees post-arrival. And it outlines how sponsors will support refugees in key areas like housing, healthcare, employment, social integration. It ensures also that nothing falls through the cracks and that refugees receive consistent, coordinated support. A well-prepared plan also helps sponsors to stay organized and accountable, meeting the requirements of IRCC. And why it is crucial? Because it provides coordination and prevents, identifies service gaps, ensures nothing falls, as I mentioned before, through the cracks, and refugees receive consistent coordinated support, and prevents gaps in services. So when you identify services, if you're settling the refugees in an urban setting versus rural, so identifying these services and anticipate what gaps might come along the way and address these gaps and needs. Encourages also independence and community connection. So sponsors benefits from the preparing a good settlement plan will give them guidance and accountability. So they use the plan to systematically address refugee needs and collaborate effectively with local providers. So it builds stronger collaboration with service providers. RSTP provides a training component to to settlement workers and settlement professionals at multiple SPOs to educate them on the role of the sponsors within the sponsorship and how the relationship between the sponsors and the sponsored refugees, the newcomers, is unique, and why sponsors needs to be informed and stay up to date with any progress related to their settlement support. And the outcome of this is fostering independence and connection, and providing confidence to the sponsors and empower refugees as well. And it will lead to a successful sponsorship journey. So I'll move to the next slide. So RSTP tools, resources for planning. So RSTP, as I mentioned, offers a variety of tools to help sponsors create effective settlement plans. These include samples, training modules, and examples, detailed guides, sponsor booklets. Sponsors can also attend webinars and reach out to RSTP trainers for personalized support. These resources empower sponsors to feel confident and prepared, ultimately leading to a better outcome for the refugees they support. So we'll go over some, sorry, I think I skipped this one. I skipped this slide. Forgive me, because the view sometimes is not as I expected. So settlement plan, as I mentioned, it's a detailed roadmap to supporting refugees post-arrival. It outlines how sponsors will support refugees in key areas like healthcare, employment, and social integration. No, I think I'm sorry. We went over. Yeah, I just missed mentioning that all the information can be found in Chapter 7 of our settlement preparation booklet on our website. This is what so the tools we provide is the settlement plan, is examples guide sponsors through each step of creating effective settlement plans. And also, we provide training modules, online, in-person courses over essential refugee sponsorship and settlement topics. We provide guides and checklists detailed by step-by-step guides and checklists supporting planning and implementation. And also interactive learning through webinars, Q&A sessions that enable sponsors to engage with experts and clarify doubts. So to conclude, the settlement plan should be used with the understanding that circumstances may change during the settlement period, and it may be revised and updated to reflect these changes. So being prepared involved learning also about available local resources and researching anything that will help them accomplish the task in the checklist. It also requires developing your group's support skills, cultural awareness, ethical considerations, confidentiality and privacy, emotional and social support topics. All these topics, RSTP provides training throughout the sponsorship stages on these topics and more. Here is a slide with list of resources available for sponsors to help them during all through the sponsorship stages. And this is our contact information for further connection and support. Thank you very much.
So I've been asked to speak about PRSN's role in supporting private sponsors. One thing I'd like to update from Anne's introductory comments is PRSN now is a charitable organization. I think she had mentioned it as a not-for-profit. We have now become a charity according to CRA. That came through in, I think it was August of this year. Moving forward, as our motto says, we connect, learn, and share. This is an important aspect, I think, of what PRSN offers. We primarily do this through offerings like this workshop, like Lunch and Learns that are offered in the midday, sometime in the middle of the week, to provide specific information on important issues in the settlement process. We bring together those with experience, lived, professional, and academic, to provide insights into the settlement process. As in any social service type setting, we strive for best practice, but we also recognize that this may be challenging when faced with unique circumstances. And pretty much everybody who arrives, whether it's an individual or a family, come with a set of unique circumstances that you can't kind of prescribe a solution to beforehand. But we also encourage exchange among sponsors and others involved in the sector to share their experiences in order to be able to enhance our understanding and what we may have learned through any other trainings. I think to foster dialogue, one of the things that I'm going to repeat throughout mine, which will be redundant to some of the things we've already heard from May and from Biftu, is to build community. And I think building community is an important aspect of sustaining sponsorship and the sponsorship process going forward. Could I have the next slide, please? From the research, Biftu has already spoken to what the research was. There's a question that was asked about what sustains demanding but rewarding volunteer work. I think there were two phrases or two statements that were made in that document: to do something, and it's the right thing to do. And I think a number of us are motivated by that. I think there are other things that perhaps motivate people to become sponsors in the first place and or sustain them to become repeat sponsors over time. But I think those are two key things: to do something, because I think people are generally motivated to do things that are right and to do the right thing as well. Each application submitted demonstrates community taking action. I think community practice was something that Biftu had mentioned, and community building. And I'm going to repeat that again and again as we go forward. This process is supported by a number of organizations, as we've heard, RSTP from sponsors as well, SAWS, other community organizations, settlement agencies, and so on. We all work together to try and make this happen and happen well. Next slide, please. The figure you see on this slide is the circle of support surrounding sponsored newcomers. With respect to training, as May indicated, there's a lot of preparatory work that's done by RSTP. Teaches you, all of the nuts and bolts about the process, how to prepare the applications, what your responsibilities are, the funding requirements, et cetera, setting up a settlement plan and so on, mainly pre-arrival and so on, although I do know that this extends into the post-arrival period where PRSN comes in. We do mostly post-arrival stuff. This is where we get to connect, learn, and share to be able to share those experiences that everyone has had in terms of settling individuals or families and so on. SAWs are involved throughout the process. They're usually involved before, during, after as well. And PRSN's offerings, this is fairly critical, I think, as well. PRSN was established by sponsors for sponsors. So this is a mutual sharing environment that has been set up, generally for the post-arrival issues and so on. Topics of interest are presented or brought forward by sponsors themselves. And this is, I think, something that helps confirm in sponsors' mind they're being heard. Like, these are the issues, the problems that are being presented when sponsors take on the responsibility of sponsoring someone, and there's an opportunity to engage with each other in doing this. Again, I'm going to come back and say it's community building, and I think this helps sustain the process, the ability of people to be able to do this sponsorship going forward. Next slide, please. I think for many of us, this is the moment we've been waiting for. You could see the plane, it's arriving, it's early in the morning and so on. Plane is about to touch down within a few minutes. Actually, I should correct that, within a few hours. We'll see the people or the person that we've sponsored emerging through the arrivals door at the airport. We can welcome them to their new home. I recall actually sitting in on a talk by a young Syrian author who had just produced his first English language novel, him saying that this isn't a Disney movie where the music swells and as the plane lands, it's a happy end to the story. This is where the work to settle is actually just beginning. So we meet the person at the airport. There's lots to be done at that point. It's the start of the next phase, which most of us think of as being the 12 months. I personally think of that as being anywhere up to 3 to 5 years, like when they get to swear allegiance to Canada in their citizenships. But I also think of it as being a lifelong experience on my part. And this is also where PRSN takes an important role, offering these trainings, but the offering also of a space for collaboration and cooperation and exchange of experiences. Next slide, please. I've used the word finally here because repeatedly we've heard already today about the frustration of the length of time that applications take to be processed. I think with recent, actually with the budget this last week, now we're hearing about cutbacks in terms of the numbers of people being accepted in as refugees, but also that there is the likelihood now of up to, I think it is 6 years for an application to be processed, which is ridiculously long. You think of people who are in dangerous, life-threatening situations, 6 years is a lifetime. But I mean, this is the kind of situation that we are experiencing. And it also has led, I think, significantly to sponsor fall off. I think people don't want to wait around for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, to see the fruits of their labors and their emotional investment in this. It's an obstacle to sustainability of the PSR program. The challenge is to keep sponsors energized and engaged. Public sentiment has changed. Political sentiment has changed. Economic headwinds are blowing all over. This is creating significant challenges for sponsorship as a program. Pendulum has swung the opposite direction, but I am firm in my belief that the pendulum will swing back. We will get back to a time when there is more engagement, more interest visibly in being. Sorry, I think I just lost my slide. Anyway, I'll keep going. For some, as I said, arrival is a rush. You finally meet the person, often after years. First few days, everything's is a blur. There's a lot of things to do. I break down the responsibilities into two major components: the technical components, the initial rush. That's the stuff that, RSTP. There are a number of guides that, have checklists and so on. The technical things that you can take care of. It's not that they're insignificant, but I think the more difficult or interpersonal elements, the harder part of this. It's like you're dealing with real people who have come with real issues and challenges that need to be addressed in order to help them settle properly and successfully. There's a short list. I'm not quite sure what happened to the, I'm not seeing my slide, but I'm not sure what happened to it. Preparation, I think, is important, RSTP training and so on. Sponsors can be taught a number of these things before. It gives them somewhat a level of confidence going forward. But you don't want to forget things, so you, of course, take into account all of the stuff that you've learned. But there are major challenges that have to be addressed, and some of these are more easily addressed than others. Housing, employment, addressing mental health issues. I don't think that was actually raised specifically this morning, but it is something that I've come into contact with in a number of circumstances where, how do you do that? What is the best way to do that? It's easy to say you can seek out mental health supports, but we all know that, coming from my background in the health sector, there's a critical shortage of health service providers, delivery organizations in the mental health sector. So in some sense, the initial rush, is the easy part. Housing aside, is usually the big elephant in the room. But what we're seeing, the strength of PR in private sponsorship of refugees and PRSN, is the personal connection. When there are private sponsors involved, there is already a human connection to community that people are just arriving to as brand new arrivals to the country. PRSN can be an important resource, drawing on the knowledge, expertise, and lived experience. Refugees who are newcomers, I want to stress that they're newcomers when they arrive here, are human beings with their own experience, their own knowledge, their own feelings, expectations, fears, like anyone else. They are autonomous beings. But this can also lead to conflicts. And I know that there was one previous session that PRSN talking about those conflicts, and that these are important things to learn about. How we handle these situations, situations that we rarely or never have experienced because they're brand new to us. These are things that can be difficult to teach in this situation. Psychologists, social workers, therapists, and so on are formally trained, take years to learn techniques, how to deal with this kind of stuff. Most sponsors are not trained that way. But there is an opportunity to learn from experts. They can be professionals, academics, but they can also be people who have lived experience, and that's both from the sides of the sponsor and also the newcomer, because they can share their experience of what they felt and how they've entered into these interactions with each other and so on. Again, connect, learn, share, building community, and so on. Next slide, please. Over the past couple of years, PRSN has produced a couple of its own reports on surveys based on relationship between sponsors. And the first one was settlement agencies in 2023. And the one that was just released earlier this year is the with sponsorship agreement holders in 2025. I encourage people to read these. They are posted on PRSN's website. Find out what we found, the themes that emerged. I'm not going to go into that in detail. But they do suggest building awareness of those functioning in the space. That's RSTP, SAWS, settlement agencies, community members, community organizations beyond just the ones I've listed, and working in collaboration. And I think this is one thing that there is an opportunity to do more of, work in collaboration with all of the other players, actors that are in the space. In a way, the private sponsorship of refugee model can be a model for community building in itself, because it's bringing these different interests and actors together to provide this kind of service for newcomers coming to Canada. It builds within communities, but it also builds those bridges across with newcomers who come with different cultural, ethnic, and social experiences from outside, which is what Canada is based on and founded on and built upon. And again, building community. One of the things that was also referred to, I think, in BIFTU's research was people who had been sponsored, who are now settled here, for lack of a better word, some less, maybe some more settled, some actually now citizens are interested in being sponsors themselves. This is part of the sustainability process, renewing, regenerating, rebuilding the sponsor community itself over time. They find it as a way to give back, whatever their motivation. This is also a renewal, regeneration of the process. Next slide, please. And this is my last one. So I think PRSN provides a really valuable opportunity and an important role in consolidating the voice of sponsors in this space. And I think this is something that I'm hoping that we can move PRSN to do more diligently over time. There are settlement agencies, there are SAWs and so on. Sometimes they speak for sponsors, but I don't think they speak as sponsors. And that's an important role that I think we can take on and move forward. We want to be seen as a trusted and reliable partner and collaborator in this space with the other actors that are here. I've used the expression, as I said, building community throughout this segment as a pathway to sustainability. And I do believe that's the case. The more we can feel like we are a community of people who are working toward common goals, I think that's a way that we can sustain this process and our community going forward. Thanks, and I'll stop there.
So I thought what I would do at this point is take the next 20 minutes to talk a little bit about taking this discussion a bit farther afield. So you've heard a lot about very specific requirements as it relates to refugee sponsorship and some of the challenges that we have today. And let's take this down to a little bit more practical view. So Gail's going to operate my slides. And Gail, next slide, please. Thank you. So I don't really have to tell you, you're the experts in sponsorship journey and the frustration, the timelines, the normal and difficult parts of this journey. It's very much a long wait. I think there's ideas, though, that we can share or talk about that might support the practices for group engagement and motivation at a time when these delays can be so complicated and frustrating and feel like the ground is continuing to shift underneath us. Next slide, please. So I think we've all got a particular view about why motivation and engagement matters. And when we think about that challenging waiting period where we see drop off of sponsors and we have to try and keep ourselves engaged and committed, we have to think about, why is motivation and engagement so important? And obviously it's driving commitment and readiness and making sure that we're continuing to be a tight group that's connected and has the capability of recruiting new members, and knowing that groups or participants in groups that have a low motivation or a low engagement have a pretty high risk of drop off. So I thought I would share an experience that I had many years ago in my corporate space, because it's quite similar to this kind of frustration of a long journey that appears to have no end. And I can tell you that a few years ago, in my corporate business team, we were in the middle of a really significant company reorganization and restructure. And whenever you say those words, that means jobs are going to be lost, jobs are going to be created. There's a lot of anxiety about how that's going to affect me personally. Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to get a different job? Am I going to get a different boss? Am I going to not like what I'm going to be asked to do next? So all of that anxiety, will I be successful? And so what I found was that during that time when we were doing the planning as a human resources team, there was so much uncertainty. We were moving ahead. Our parent company was slowing us down because of some other challenges that they were facing. We'd already started to talk about it, so we'd created this higher level of anxiety. And what I felt like was the team every day was facing new doubts, questions we couldn't answer, and lots of delays. So, talk about feeling like you're really in the middle of chaos. It's brutal. It's really hard when you're doing this work. So I started to do something where I met with the team every day. We just had a 10-minute group stand-up meeting. Some were remote, some were on site. And what we did in that 10 minutes was we just talked about what's going on today. We didn't push about the responsibilities or the activities. We simply listened to the frustrations and feedback and shared the smallest wins we could, no matter how minor, in that 10-minute discussion. And then we went off to do whatever work we were responsible to do for the balance of the day. What I started to see happen very quickly in those 10-minute meetings is that there was a slow shift towards people speaking up more, and towards people calling out just the smallest of wins and sharing the smallest of support for each other on the team, which I hadn't seen before. And then it helped us to get more focused on here and now and more focused on what we could control. People started feeling better about how they were operating in this environment of uncertainty and change. And we didn't feel like we were such victims, like we were just waiting for somebody to give us approval to move forward. We felt like we had more control over at least what we could do and what we could accomplish, and then we could move forward together with greater certainty about having a connection to each other and support of each other. Next slide, please. So, we talk about what keeps people motivated, and we've heard some really great research and some really great ideas from all of the speakers. And it boils down to some pretty simple things about what keeps people motivated, belief in the mission, meaningful opportunity to have a positive impact, having pride in the prior accomplishments, feeling valued and recognized, having some agency over just the control of our actions and the consequences. And we talk a lot about having agency and having influence, and we'll spend a few minutes on that shortly. But I think there's a growing recognition that in times of uncertainty, people start to feel like they have no agency, like they have no control over them, what's going to happen to them or what they can contribute. And that's a pretty frustrating place for most of us to be that are involved, especially in this kind of work, because we have a greater mission to satisfy. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this very teeny weeny slide. This is a slide based on a model called the Circle of Influence. Came out a number of years ago by Stephen Covey. Many of you are probably familiar with him. But it emphasizes focusing on areas that we care about or feel affected by, like global issues, like other people's challenges and actions, and just the enhancing our personal effectiveness and control in our lives by looking at this circle of influence. What tends to happen at a time when things are uncertain is we get all balled up in the things we don't have any control over. And what this model really helps us think about is, in the circle of concern, that outer ring, do we have any influence over that? And that's the things that we care about and we're affected by, and they may cause us stress, but they're often beyond our control, like government issues. Maybe we can rally and support for change, but we can't control that. And so spending a lot of time and energy feeling dissatisfied because we can't make change in that area of concern is not going to be the most productive or the healthiest place for us to spend our energy. So that's the outer circle, that circle of concern. The middle circle is the circle of influence. And when we think about that, it's aspects we can influence, but we can't directly control. Again, the example about trying to influence government outcomes or best preparation so that in the eventual timeline of a family coming to Canada, that we are so prepared and ready for them. So by focusing on that circle, we can take some proactive steps to affect the change in our lives and the lives of others. And then if we boil it down to the circle of control, which is what Stephen Covey says is the best place to be hanging out when you're feeling like you don't have control over your environment, and it's frustrating for those of us that are so action oriented, that innermost circle is the things we have direct control over. And the things that we have direct control over are things like our thoughts and our attitudes and our behaviors, not the world outside of that. And this is where we can make decisions and we can take actions that lead to personal empowerment and effectiveness. So when you start to feel like I can't control the outcomes, or I can't make things happen that I really want to happen, this is a great model to go back to and ask yourself, where am I spending my time and energy right now? Because I might be causing myself more frustration than I need. Next slide. The next one I'm going to talk about, you've probably all seen this one, is an older model as well. Bruce Tuckman launched this back in the 60s and talked a lot about what happens in a group. And because sponsorship groups are by nature of definition a group, it's important to understand the dynamics of what's happening in a group at all times. So some of you may be familiar with this work because it talks about when you have a new group or you have a lot of new people on your group, you end up in a place called forming, which is trying to develop all the practices, getting to know each other, who I can trust and who I have confidence in, and just really forming yourselves as a team. And as this cycle continues, you can see the effectiveness increases and the impact that you can have as a group also increases. So the two axes on this chart. So the first stage is that forming stage, just kind of getting to know each other and setting up some ground rules. And again, it happens in a new team, but it also happens when you bring in new members into a team, particularly if it's a lot of new members, a high percentage, because it changes the dynamics again. Storming is that next stage where now you stop being so polite to each other, and there's some conflict that starts to happen, and there's some focus on people's opinions and challenging each other. That's a really normal part of the process of forming a group. It moves us to the next stage of being able to normalize our behaviors as a group, or norming, and that speaks to things like resolving conflict, establishing some of those norms about how we operate, and working collaboratively for best outcomes. And then the third phase, if you continue on this journey of the dynamic of a group developing, the next one is called performing. And this is where you start to reach some maximum effectiveness as a team or a group, and you're focused on achieving goals. The goals may be as lofty as waiting for your family to arrive, or they may be all the preparation that needs to happen in anticipation of a family arriving. But you start to be able to perform at a much higher level as a group. And it's because you've gone through this kind of painful journey as a team together. And then the last step, which sometimes happens after the group has achieved its objectives, is the group adjourns or it disbands. And some members of the group turn up again later, and you go back into the forming process. So this is just a model to think about, like when the group's feeling a little uncertain, or we seem to be not connecting as well as we had before. It's an opportunity to go back and look at this model and ask ourselves as a group, where are we on this model, and what might be in the way, and what might be some of the steps that we could take to get ourselves back on the path again of high impact and high effectiveness. Let me go to the next slide. Thank you, Gail. And here's another model again. So I'm sharing some kind of practical models that from my experience in corporate and volunteer roles, I've been able to see application of, particularly when you're in a time of greater uncertainty. These are things that you can pause, ask yourself about as a team, and then figure out, how do we leverage some of this knowledge to help us just get back on track. So this next model I wanted to talk about is something called appreciative inquiry by David Cooper-Ryder. And his premise about appreciative inquiry is we often start from the place of a SWOT exercise when we're trying to figure out what's working or not working. And SWOT, as many of you know, stands for an exercise of defining your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and threats as a team. And then figuring out from that, can we achieve the strategies or the goals, and what do we need to do differently in order to do that? Where David came from was, if we think about starting from the place of what's working versus what's not working, that will lead us to engaging the group to co-design our future. So this model really starts from thinking about the strengths we have as a group, affirming the things that we know we do really well, and encouraging this culture of inquiry, like asking each other what we do well. But it really is in service to helping to create a shared vision and purpose. And that's another thing that helps to keep a group connected and engaged. And again, particularly at a time when we might be waffling a little bit as a group because we're sort of waiting for something to happen. But outcomes out of this kind of model often result in provoking action, inspiring deeper commitment to the objectives, and leading to better results or improved results. And how you can use this as a group is to stop at some point in your group structure and talk through what are the strengths we have as a group? Like what makes our team unique, or what makes the PRSN unique? And then what are we most proud of when it comes to what we've accomplished so far? And then we can talk about as well, what are our greatest accomplishments? And that alone helps us to set the stage from a more appreciative perspective versus the negative of what's not working. Then we can look at what are the opportunities that we have as a group, again, to drive some higher engagement and commitment, and ask ourselves as a team, what changes or trends do we need to align with in the community as we see what's happening around us, knowing what we're good at, knowing what we're strong in. And another question could be, are there some unique opportunities today that we could align to? And a last question could be about community partnerships and what does that look like so that it better enables us to achieve our goals. So it's really spending time thinking about our best experiences, thinking about our values, and thinking about what we dream for in the future and what we wish for as a success of our group. Next slide, please. So a couple of things that I thought I would just share, and this is just from practical experience of watching teams kind of work their way through the dynamics when there's uncertainty in the environment, which when is there ever not? So just some things that I found have been helpful, but these regular check-ins, like regular frequent conversations and asking each other what's working, asking each other, how are you doing? And really listening to that, sharing tasks, celebrating successes, storytelling with purpose, which is really using actual examples of stories and listening to each other's stories so that we are supporting where we see success in the group and having an opportunity to share that. The next one would be encouraging mental health and resilience. We all know how challenging it can be and frustrating when we feel like we are not in the circle of influence. And so thinking about how is that affecting you emotionally, or how is that affecting your mental health, could also be a great conversation to be having with each other. Next slide. So keeping your group strong. Next slide, please, Gail. I'm sorry, last slide. Thank you. Next, can you go back a couple, please? Thank you. So the impact of this strong sponsor group, I mean, we all understand why it's just so important to keep the group strong, but a couple of things that we've heard from the other speakers today really highlight it's about support of each other. It results in smoother settlements, better decision-making, improvements in terms of conflict and turning conflict into opportunities, and really encouraging those repeat sponsorships, as well as attracting people to the group to help augment the group as it stands today, and then resulting in higher personal satisfaction, which from that cycle we know helps to drive higher engagement again. Next slide. So I wanted to spend a couple of minutes, I think I have a couple of minutes left here, and ask if in the chat, if you could open up the chat and just drop in your thoughts on a couple of questions here about what keeps us together from the perspective of an appreciative inquiry. What's one reason that you are still involved in sponsoring? And then the second question is, what's one thing that your group does well today? So if we could just take a couple of minutes and share that in the chat, or just call it out if we want to open up the lines for conversation. It's a really positive experience to spend some time in this space.